Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 55, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I am just back from a trip to Tacoma, Washington, where I took 3 days of sewing classes at the Sewing and Design School. The Sewing and Design School is owned and operated by Ryliss Bod, and I did an interview with Ryliss. It's episode 41 if you want to go back and look at it or listen to it. And Ryliss brings Kenneth D to teach classes at the Sewing and Design School a couple of times a year. And if you don't know who Kenneth D is, I would strongly encourage you to check him out. He has been a contributor to Threads magazine for many years, and he's got a very impressive bio. I'll put links to all that information in the show notes, but suffice it to say that if you're going to learn any kind of clothing drafting from someone, he is probably the best or one of the best people to learn it from. So when I found out that Ryliss was bringing him in for a trouser drafting class, I immediately signed up for it. That was back in March of 2024, and it has been a long 7 months waiting to get to this class. I also decided that because I was making the trip to Tacoma, I should add on a coat class with Ryliss. Ryliss designed a princess seamed coat that she sells the pattern for, and she also teaches classes on. So I signed up for that, and I took that on Thursday. So I'm going to talk about all 3 days of classes and what I learned and where I go from here. I've mentioned before that my younger daughter lives in Seattle. She's an assistant buyer at Nordstrom. She was not in Seattle this week when I went there. When I went to Tacoma, she actually was on a trip of her own, so I didn't get to see her. I didn't actually go to Seattle. I went straight to Tacoma. My older daughter is a graduate of Pacific Lutheran University, which is near Tacoma, so I'm not unfamiliar with the area. I can find my way around reasonably well, and I went to the Sewing and Design School last November, just before spending Thanksgiving with my two girls, to take a class with Ryliss, so I had been there before as well too. I stayed in an Airbnb in the Old Town neighborhood of Tacoma. I like to stay in Airbnbs when I travel just because I have some kind of bizarre food preferences, so I like to be able to cook for myself, and it usually ends up being cheaper that way. So my Airbnb was only about 10 minutes from the Sewing and Design School. So Thursday morning, I met Ryliss at the Sewing and Design School at 9:30, and we talked a little bit about the coat project. I have coat fabric that I ordered from Mood Fabrics. It's a wool cashmere, but she suggested, and in hindsight, this is probably what I should have done. She suggested, let's make a muslin, and I've got 3-yard cuts of fabric here that I keep for my coat class students. So let's go look through those, and we'll find you something to use to make a first iteration of the coat pattern rather than using your good fabric. So I picked out a very pretty turquoise and gray plaid fabric. And part of the reason I chose that was not only because I liked the fabric, but also because I've never worked with plaids before. So I figured while we were making a coat, I should get some experience using plaid fabric. Ryliss has probably 12 or 15 versions of this coat pattern that she's made, and so she's able to show different variations using different fabrics, different techniques. The basic coat pattern is like a 3/4 length, I'd call it a car coat. The original pattern is for a princess seam style with the sleeves integrated as part of the side panel. Because we were using a plaid, she suggested that we cut the fronts in one piece, which we did. So she showed me how to overlap the pattern pieces and tape them so that I had an integrated front panel rather than one with princess seams that would break up the plaid. This is not necessarily how I would work. I would trace the pattern, but in an effort to be expedient and not spend a whole lot of time doing other things rather than actually making the coat, we just cut and taped the pattern together. The plaid wasn't complicated. It was, it formed a check pattern that was where the checks were about 1.5 inches square. So laying it out wasn't overly complicated, and I didn't have to use a whole lot of extra fabric. We cut it in a single layer, which again was her recommendation, not to cut plaids on the fold, which makes a lot of sense. The sleeves have cuffs that are sewn on, and after lengthening my sleeves by about 1 inch because I have freakishly long arms, we ended up cutting the cuffs on the bias, and that made a really nice detail. I like that a lot. The coat has an integrated hood and front so that it makes something of a shawl collar when it's being worn. And sewing that hood to the body was probably the most complicated part of this whole coat because you're sewing an inside curve to an outside curve, and there are a few tricks to doing that. By the end of the afternoon, I had a completed coat except for the sleeve hems and the bottom hem. I did the front hem there. I should note that we also decided that I would finish the seams on the serger. So Ryliss set her Bernina serger up for a 3-thread overlock with some dark turquoise thread, and that made a very pretty seam finish on the inside. I can see why Ryliss has made so many variations of this coat because it lends itself really well to all kinds of pattern hacks, and I bought a clean copy of the pattern to bring home because I definitely want to make the original version with the princess seams, and I will do that out of a plainer fabric, something that doesn't require pattern matching. Ryliss is a wonderful teacher. She's got a great sense of humor. She's very calm. She loves teaching people how to sew. It's really obvious. So I came out of there with an almost completed coat. I still have to do the buttonholes, but I was very pleased with the class. So I went back to the Airbnb and kind of vegged out for a while and ate dinner, and then I went to bed. And I was very excited about the trouser class on Friday morning with Kenneth D. And obviously some of the other people were too, because Ryliss had told us that the building would be open at 8:30, and I got there at about 20 after 8, and there was already a line of people waiting outside. Ryliss has classroom space for 10 people. It's a tight fit, but 10 people do fit in there. We actually had 9 people in the class because one student had to cancel at the last minute, unfortunately. We came in and got settled, and Ryliss handed out our little packet, which contained handouts on which we were going to do all of our calculations. She talked a bit about the sewing and design school, and then she turned it over to Kenneth D. to start the trouser drafting class. Kenneth is an exceptionally good teacher. I get a little nervous sometimes when I'm taking classes as a teacher because I know how I like to do things and how I like to run my classes, and I've been disappointed in other teachers in the past, but he is right up there at the top. He gave a broad overview of what we were going to be doing and then asked us to pair up. We were sitting 2 to a table, so he suggested that we just get our table mates to help us with our measurements. So there was a box of elastic, and we all took elastic, and he wanted the elastic at our waist, where we would like the waist of our pants to be, as well as our half hip. And then we took turns measuring each other and writing those numbers down. And those numbers are what we plugged into the formulas as we went along to plot them out onto a piece of drafting paper. Kenneth encouraged questions, and as we started the drafting process, he made sure that we understood each step before he went on to the next one. I am not great about taking pictures in the moment. I tend to be too focused on what's happening to remember to get out a camera or my phone. But after we got the initial draft done on the piece of paper, I took a picture because I was just so gobsmacked that I actually had something in front of me that looked like it might fit. And it looked like it might fit because the rise was high enough. This has been my ongoing issue with pants throughout my entire lifetime. I love high-rise pants because anything lower than a high-rise pant doesn't stay on my body. So that was the one picture that I took. It's on my blog if you want to go take a look at it. So we spent most of the morning doing the drafting part of the Trouser class, and a little bit after lunchtime, we were pretty much all ready to start cutting out our muslins. Before we got to the cutting out stage, Kenneth came around and looked at each of our drafts on our drafting paper and made a few additional adjustments based on, he's got 40 plus years of knowledge, so he can look at something and say, well, you need to move this here and you need to move this here and you need to adjust this and adjust that. But by the time we were finished, we had a basic outline of what we needed to cut out. It did not have seam allowances with it. So when we got ready to cut out our muslins, we had to use tracing paper or carbon paper. I keep calling it tracing paper, and it's really technically it's carbon paper. And we had to use a Clover double wheel tracing wheel. So what we did was we put one piece of carbon paper between the table and the lower layer of fabric and one between the pattern and the upper piece of fabric. And then we ran the tracing wheel with one wheel along the outline of the pattern and the other wheel at a 1.5 inch distance to give us a generous seam allowance for making adjustments when the trousers were sewn together. It's easier than it sounds as I'm describing it. It just requires a place to lay out your muslin and your entire pant pattern so that you can trace around it and move the carbon paper. By the time I got my muslin cut out, it was 4:30, the end of the class, and I had gone to Tacoma with all these plans to go down to the Joann Fabrics at Tacoma Mall, which is only about 10 minutes from the Sewing and Design School. I was going to go down there and do some shopping because they've got a great apparel fabric section. But honestly, I was so mentally exhausted after that day of drafting that it was literally all I could do to get myself back to the Airbnb and make some dinner and just sit down and veg out and play video games on my iPad. That's how brain dead I was. We all met up again on Saturday morning at 8:30 at the Sewing and Design School, and I was much fresher and decided that it was a good thing that I had not sewn my muslin together on Friday afternoon because I probably would have made some mistakes. As it was, I almost sewed my two front legs together. Unfortunately, my table mate saw that. She happened to be a sewing instructor, a sewing teacher from a community college in Chico, California. And she saw what I was doing and said, "I don't think you want to do that." And I was like, "Oh, no, I don't." So I got my pants assembled and we were to sew the seams and then insert a zipper in the front seam just so we could get into and out of the pants. And once that was all done, we were to go change into the trousers, into our muslin, and come back out so that Kenneth could look at them and make any adjustments that were necessary. I put mine on and I thought that they fit reasonably well. I don't think that that was any skill on my part. I think that was probably luck because some people got it on the first iteration. Some people had to make several iterations. I came out and Kenneth looked at mine and he said, well, that's pretty damn good. So I got close on the first try. The two big adjustments that he made, and I say big in quotation marks because they weren't actually that large. But one thing he did was, I have a very flat butt. It runs in my family. And he contoured the side seams in such a way that it gave me a little bit of shaping underneath my butt, which I certainly appreciate. I'm not entirely sure what he did and how he did it, but I know that he did do that. And the other adjustment that he made, and this one I was really happy to see because this has happened in all of the trousers that I've made so far, which consist mostly of the Style Arc Linda pull-on pants pattern. But every version of those that I've made, I have a diagonal drag line running to my crotch, from my crotch down to the back of my leg. And what he did to get that out was he cut the bottom half of the trouser off and the trouser pattern off and moved it by 1/2 inch. And he said that is sometimes necessary to keep the fabric from twisting, which is what was happening on my pants. I feel fairly confident that I could diagnose some of these issues based on what's happening, but it's the practical application where I just don't have the experience to know that this is the fix that you make. So watching him make those changes to the pattern was very educational. It was educational on mine, but it was almost even more educational on some of the other students because there was such a variety of body shapes in that class. Some people were short, some people were tall, some people were kind of average. Several women had very pronounced hourglass figures, and they needed to make different adjustments, like a double set of darts instead of a single set of darts. We had one young guy in the class, and he nailed it on the first try, which Kenneth said is not unusual for men because they just don't have the fitting issues that women do. So once Kenneth made the adjustment to my pattern, he suggested I take the pants apart, cut new back legs, and reassemble my muslin. So I did that, and by just before lunchtime, I had a pair of pants that fit me perfectly. I should stop and note here that I'm using pants and trousers interchangeably. Kenneth was trained by a woman who used the term trousers because pants referred to underwear. And she thought that was vulgar to refer to trousers as pants. But you know what? I live in the United States. We refer to them as pants. So I'm going to use those two terms interchangeably. I should have mentioned that at the beginning of the podcast. But by the time lunch came around, I had reassembled my pants and put them on. And honestly, my test for a well-fitting garment is I put it on my body and I can't feel it. It truly is almost as if I'm not wearing anything at all because I don't have to adjust it. I don't have to tug at it. I don't have to reposition it. I put it on and it just fits. And that's how these pants felt. So I went out and got the okay from Kenneth and I was basically done. So after lunch, Ryliss has lunch catered in, and on Friday we had Thai food, and on Saturday we had Italian, both delicious. So after lunch, I brought my coat back in, and I hemmed the sleeves and I hemmed the bottom, and I watched and listened as Kenneth made adjustments on the other students' muslins. We had one lady who had uneven hips, and that was fascinating. She actually ended up with 4 different pattern pieces. So she had a front and a back trouser pattern for one side and a front and a back for the other side. And that was all done to accommodate the unevenness in her hips. It really was very gratifying to see at the end of the class how every single student's pants fit them perfectly. Even the people who came in and thought that they had, insurmountable fitting problems ended up with trousers that looked phenomenal on them. In the last hour of our class time, Kenneth had us gather around the cutting table, and he showed us how to take our pant sloper and use that to draft and design different styles of pants. So jeans, or maybe wide leg palazzo pants, pants with pockets, either inseam pockets or trouser pockets, just a bunch of different variations and how to make those happen. Kenneth said that after this class, we should not ever have to use a commercial pattern again. I'm not quite ready to take the training wheels off, so I may do what I did with my bodice sloper and use my pant sloper to compare to commercial patterns to give me a good idea of how to adjust a commercial pattern so that it looks more like my pant sloper. And then I can follow the instructions that come with the commercial patterns, because I don't know enough yet about trouser construction, but Kenneth is coming back to the Sewing and Design School next June to teach a 3-day trouser construction class. And that is a class that is strictly on techniques. There is no drafting involved. Each student learns how to make the different components of a pair of trousers, so a fly front, invisible zippers, whatever kind of waistband you want to put on them. And I'm really tempted to take that class, because I think then I'll have everything in my arsenal where I can make any kind of pair of pants that I need. I think that probably where I'm going to start is I want to compare my pant sloper to the Ramona skirt pattern, because I want to see if there's any adjustments that I need to make to that pattern before I start monkeying around with trousers again. All in all, it was an amazing 3 days of sewing. My head is just full of new knowledge and ideas and things I want to try. I love taking classes there because Ryliss is such a great hostess and she's such a great teacher. Being able to take a class from somebody like Kenneth D. King is amazing. I should mention that I listened to his interview with Meg Goodman on the So and So podcast, which is it's sponsored by Bernina. And Meg Goodman is kind of my idol when it comes to podcast interviewers, because she's that good. And she did a great interview with Kenneth King. I will put the link to that in the show notes if you want to listen to it. It gives a lot of the backstory on his training and how he got to where he is today. He has several books out, but the latest one, which came out last November, is called Doll Couture. And this is such a delightful book. I bought a copy of it from Ryliss and I had him sign it while we were in class. And it's about a fashion doll, so think Barbie doll, a fashion doll that he christened Lola, after the Lola in the Barry Manilow song Copacabana. And at the end of the song, Lola, having lost her love Tony, descends into drinking and just kind of spiraling downward. And he picked up the story there and carried it forward and used his fashion dolls, for whom he made all of the clothing. There's 2 of them, Crazy Bella and Lola. And you have to read the book because it's a story as well as beautiful step outs and illustrations of all of the costumes, and a story about Lola finding herself again. It's just, I'm really eager to have the time to read it before bed every night, because I think it's just going to be such an enchanting story. He's working on a second version of Doll Couture, according to him. It was published by Taunton Press, so if you're looking for it, I will put the links to the show notes, or put the links in the show notes. I'm also probably going to pick up his other books. He's got one called Smart Fitting Solutions, which sounds like I need to have in my library. And I'm going to go look through all of my back issues of Threads magazine, because I have a lot. I've got my mother's original collection from issue number 1. So I have a lot of material that I can look through and read and educate myself. So that's probably going to be one of my projects this winter. I would highly encourage you, if you are anywhere in the Tacoma area, to go and take classes with Ryliss or Kenneth King when she brings him in. She had one person signed up for the class from Virginia who ended up not being able to make it, unfortunately. But it's not just local people that come and take those classes with Kenneth King. She has people come in from all over the country to take classes there. If you need some guidance about where to stay, you can always email me. I know that area well enough, and I can direct you to neighborhoods that are good and neighborhoods that are maybe not so good. In terms of places to stay, I'd be happy to do that. The class that I'd really like to take from Kenneth, but I don't think he's teaching it next year, is a raglan coat class. But if he ever teaches that, that's a more formal tailoring class. If he ever teaches that, I'm really wanting to take that one as well. I believe there is another trouser drafting class on the calendar for sometime in April. You can go to the Sewing and Design School website and check that out. And again, I'll put all of these links in the show notes so you can find them. I did get some feedback about last week's show, and I appreciate it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I appreciate any kind of praise or constructive criticism. All it does is help me make the show better. So keep it coming. I really do appreciate it. You can get in touch with me one of several ways. You can leave a comment on the show notes page. You can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can send me fan mail through the Buzzsprout app, the Buzzsprout website where I host my podcasts, and I see that they've now instituted a return reply feature that I don't think was there before. So now I can reply to fan mail. So I will try to start doing that. If you want to look at the show notes, they are on the podcast website, which is at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. There is a page for each episode of the podcast. There's also a guest form there. I'm still looking for guests for future episodes. So if you have an interesting sewing story to tell, or you're doing something fascinating with your sewing, please get in touch with me and fill that form out. If you want to see pictures of my new coat or some of my other sewing projects, the best place to do that is on my blog, and the easiest way to get to my blog is to go to my website at www.janetzabo.com. There are links to the Big Sky Knitting Designs website, to the podcast website, and to my blog. So if you're unsure of where to get started, start there. I think that will do it for this week's episode. So until next time, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.